Thank you. Thank you very much, and also to the group here for having me. I've just got a question in terms of a show of hands. How many of you have heard of the ITER project? All right. It's the most complex science experiment on the planet, and it's still very, very little known. My task in the next 20 minutes is going to be to give you a physics lesson, explain the really weird project management setup of this project, which is either insane or genius, depending on whether we succeed or fail. And then thirdly, to give you a little bit of a photo tour of really what's happening inside all of this. So this is our site. It's in southern France. It's about a kilometer long, 400 meters wide. This building in the center is where the sort of Holy of Holies is taking place. So what's it about? Fusion energy, as we see it, is a generational challenge, meaning that we've got to have something, as is very evident, to replace the massive amount of carbon fuels. We are strong supporters of every type of renewables, but we just think that in terms of baseload power, that's not going to cut it. There are a lot of fears about nuclear, which is the conventional fission stuff. And so we've got 35 countries coming together to work on that. So if you look at the flags, quite obviously, look at the news for any of these countries. You've got Russia working side by side with the US, with China, with Europe, with India, Korea, South Korea, and Japan. These are not necessarily ideological bedfellows whatsoever. So what are they doing, devoting 40 years, starting quite some time ago, to trying to make this a reality? It's because they share one thing, which is they want a better future for their children. So now the nuclear physics lesson. So fusion is the most abundant source of energy in the universe. It's what is happening. It's why you're here. It's why you've got life and heat and light on Earth. In the center of the sun and all the stars, the sun is a big ball of hydrogen, and at the center, just by gravitational force, you have hydrogen atoms that are pressed together so tightly that they combine, they fuse, and a tiny bit of energy is converted to, a tiny bit of mass is converted to energy. Fine, but how do you do that on Earth? Because the sun has got a mass that's about 300,000 times that of the Earth. There's no way we can build that on Earth. So for 100 years, we've been trying to figure out how do we do it, and we think we're getting really close. So in a fission reactor, so all of the nuclear reactors that are operating today, the 400 reactors out there, they're all using fission. So that means you take something really heavy like uranium, you split it, right, with a neutron, and that creates both what devolves into waste, other substances, and more neutrons. So a chain reaction, and that chain reaction has to be managed very, very critically. Everybody's paying attention to the current situation at the nuclear plant in Ukraine and hoping that we don't have any sort of a meltdown of Chernobyl, that kind of thing. In a situation like fusion, the physics make it impossible. Why? Because in a fission reactor, as I described, you've got a chain reaction that has to be managed, and you have about 200 tons, 200 to 300 tons of something like uranium or plutonium. In an equivalent-sized fusion reactor like we're building, you will have 2 to 3 grams of hydrogen, 2 forms of hydrogen. So the hydrogen is basically, a normal hydrogen would be one of those orange balls, a proton. We take deuterium, which is found in seawater, and tritium, which has 2 extra neutrons. And if you forget the engineering level of knowledge, but if you just look at the units coming at the beginning, they come in with 0.7 level of energy, and when they exit, you get a helium nucleus, which is non-radioactive here. So that's got 5 times as much energy as the incoming, and this neutron coming out has 20 times the incoming energy. Why is that so important? Because that's where all of the energy gets transported. That's where the Einstein equation, the little bit of mass converted to energy, that's where it takes place. So now you're all experts in the nuclear fusion process. But to do this, we've got to heat this plasma. First of all, we run a gas in there, and when we run the gas in, we put electricity through it, and just like a fluorescent light bulb, when you run it's gas until you turn the light on, and then it converts to a plasma. That's the 4th state of matter. So this plasma gets heated to about 150 million degrees. That's 10 times the temperature of the core of the sun. So you say, that must be insane. How is that possible? all materials on Earth would melt from that. So what you're actually doing is compressing it by using a magnetic field to hold it away from the walls. Yeah? So that's the basic physics. It's baseload power, it's carbon-free, it's abundant, it's safe, there's no long-lived radioactive waste. ITER's mission, there have been hundreds of these tokamaks built. ITER's mission is to do this at industrial scale and to create what's called a burning or a largely self-heating plasma. So this all started, this is the project now, this all started in about 1985 when Reagan and Gorbachev were trying to reduce their nuclear arms arsenals, and they wanted to also do something positive, and they said, why not this? So that became the project. It took quite a while. Europe and Japan joined almost immediately, but it took quite a while to put the design together. That was through the 90s, and then eventually China and India and Japan and Korea joined in the 2000s, and this has gotten us to where we are today. So that sounds complicated a bit, but it doesn't illustrate yet the complexity, because what the members wanted, they all wanted to hold this themselves. They wanted their companies to have the advantage. And the compromise was that they decided to break the machine down into constituent parts, and 80 to 90% of the financial contribution would be in the form of physical components. So you've got a giant Lego, you've got factories on 3 continents, thousands of companies putting all of this together and shipping it to the south of France, where it has to have this insane degree of precision and all fit together. So these are the magnets. This is just one example, but the magnet there in the middle, about 8 stories tall, is being made in increments in San Diego. These gold ones, about half of them being made in Japan, about half being made in Italy. And then the round ones are, the one on the bottom is already installed, made in China, some of the others in Europe because they're too big to ship, and the one on top is sitting in St. Petersburg at the moment, about ready to ship. So that shows you the complexity, and if you look at who's supplying the coil, it gets even more so. If you look at the entire machine, you see that this whole thing, this is a simplified drawing, there are actually more than 1 million parts. All of this is being made all over the world, and again, shipped for assembly. So why is it so big? Basically because you might have heard in the news about JET. That is a machine that set some records in the UK recently. ITER is about 10 times the volume, but the result is that this is how you get, either with magnetic field strength or with size, is how you get more power out than you put in. So that's, for about the last 8 years, we've had steady overall progress. I'll give you a little illustration of where we are in terms of actual physical progress, and then see if you have any questions. So during COVID, if you look at the dates here, this is May 2020, when the first component, which was made in India and assembled, to give you an illustration, it was too big to ship because it's 30 meters. So the Indians sent it from the factory in Hajira in pieces, and then you had a crack team of German welders supervised by Indian experts under French nuclear regulation on an international site putting this whole thing together. In May 2020, when this was installed, this is the top-down view, you can see how all of this had been welded together, and this 30-meter piece ended up with under 3 millimeters of clearance in all the metrology points. This then are just some other things that were installed. The next cylinder, this is roughly, for those of you who know Stonehenge, this is roughly the size of Stonehenge, to give you a sense of sort of scale. More. This is the Chinese magnet that was put in. The next one being put in made on site in France. This is a sort of upending tool where you take these pieces, turn them up. Each one of those magnets weighs about the same as a 747 jetliner, to give you perspective. And then it's combined with these vacuum vessel sectors. And if you see the humans standing here, it's about a 6-story tall assembly with about 20 centimeters of clearance, and this is the first one actually installed, the combined piece installed. And then across the site, we're also quite well advanced in terms of systems and so forth, the cryogenics, the magnet power, heat rejection, etc. These are the largest of the magnets, the circular magnets being made on site. This is an example of what the vacuum vessel sectors look like here and the upcoming deliveries. The critical one you might be curious about is PF1. That's the top colloidal field coil. That's the one that's sitting in St. Petersburg. So all around the world, you have these various components being made to be assembled. This is the Russian magnet here. This is the one working in San Diego, and the vacuum vessel sectors in Korea. So this is our facility. This is what we're working on. It's both an experiment in international collaboration, as well as an experiment in physics and science and engineering, and tons of spin-offs. It's like CERN in the sense that we're generating all kinds of new intellectual property with implications for medicine, for space, for many other fields. The difference being this has a practical endpoint. One could argue that CERN does too, but ours is very closely defined. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Laban, thank you. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. Very interesting project. I mean, just unbelievable scale.
Yeah.
Also, unbelievable timelines. We got Reagan shaking hands with Gorby there, right?
Yeah,
this was
exactly.
some time ago. Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself, and how does this organization stay motivated over such a long period of time?
Yeah. It's a good question, and the easiest answer is emotional. We want a better future for our children, and you've got people who have devoted their entire lives to this. They think of it sort of like building a cathedral, where you may not see the end point. In fact, our Director General, who did most of the leadership for the last 7 years, just died in May in office. And so that sounds really gloomy and horrible, but the answer is it's inspiring to work on a project that could really change the future.
That is interesting. I guess we walk around famous monuments around the world. I don't know, we think like, oh wow, that took 100 years. I guess we don't think about it like, yeah, it's the same thing. It's part of someone's lives. We have 1 minute, sir, and I'm gonna ask you the sticky question, because let's go for it. Let's go right down the middle.
Sure.
How does this look? Working with Russia is not easy. How do we do this? You've just told us about this major component that's sitting in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Is that coming over the border or what?
Yeah, so obviously, if you take these countries, we didn't anticipate this particular conflict, no question. But it would be illogical to think that if you make a 40-year commitment to working together, that these countries would not have some form of conflict, whether that's armed conflict, trade wars, et cetera. And there have been other armed conflicts, and they simply never enter the ITER project. There's no provision for throwing somebody out. Now, we have domestic agencies in every one of the countries, and they have their own policies. But if you look, for example, at Europe's sanctions package, the two things that are exempted are international space research and the ITER project. It's exempted from the sanctions.
Specifically ITER?
Very, very specifically, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. You have to dig way down in, but you see the line, and it's important to us. Yeah.
Right, so recognizing that there is still some level of scientific importance here beyond, as you know, to keep looking at.
I could say it a different way. There are two wars being fought. I was talking to the head of OPEC recently, and he said, no, there are three. There's a war against poverty. Most of us who want to get rid of carbon fuels don't think about people who have no access. But there's a war against, there's a conflict going on that's very, very close to Estonia, very close to the borders here, that has us all transfixed and hoping that there can be some peaceful resolution. But there's another war. And scientists, physicists tend to think in space-time continuum. This is not one of geography, it is one of longevity, where our children stand to suffer or prosper based on the actions that we take now. And that, I think, is how we try to set our priorities.
Very long-term view. Laban, thank you very much for your time today. Wow, round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks.